The information contained in this video is intended for educational purposes. We are not responsible for any damage to your device resulting from improper disassembly or installation. Proceed at your own risk.
This is an update for the iPhone 6 Plus screen replacement tutorial. I wanted to do this in order to give everyone a close-up look at a few small parts and issues that you may encounter during this repair. And this is a result of experience over the last year or so where I've had technicians come in and say, hey, here's what I messed up or here's what I'm having a problem with. So one thing you want to watch out for is the fingerprint scanner. Down here at the bottom of the front of the screen, you have to be very, very careful. If you damage this, you will not have that functionality anymore. In addition to that, there's a cable that the scanner plugs into. It's called a long flex cable, and it goes underneath this metal plate behind the LCD. You want to be careful about this one, but if you do damage it, it is possible to replace. Last but not least, up here at the top, this was kind of a random thing that happened during this repair, but you want to watch out for these 6 metal contacts. They should not be exposed the way they are in this image, and I'm going to show you later on in the video how to fix the problem. All right, let's do this. This phone is not in horrible shape. Most of the damage is just to the glass down here near where the home button is. The LCD seems to be in okay condition, but we do want to make sure that there are no bends to the frame before we start this repair. That can be a problem as far as getting the new display to mount. We're also going to be using a white glass on this one, so it will have a black button and white outline around the outside of the LCD, something that the customer requested. So it's okay to do that. Just remember, you cannot switch out the fingerprint sensor. That needs to be the same if you want it to continue functioning. 2 screws down here at the bottom can be removed with a pentalobe driver. And then we want to pry just beneath the glass and between the glass and the metal frame. Make sure you don't go too far inside here. If you do, you can damage the LCD and some other components, although it's unlikely. But again, you don't need to go very far, just enough to get underneath here with a proper pry tool. Guitar pick works well. You can even use a credit card and just work your way around just like a 1/16 of an inch underneath the display so that it will disengage from the inside. And at a certain point, you'll be able to get your finger inside there. If it feels like it's hanging up, you can just run the pry tool a little bit further up towards the top of the phone. You don't need to go all around the entire perimeter. Once that starts to open up, we do want to have something to stabilize the screen. There are some cables that will remain on the display assembly, so we're going to reuse them. We don't want to damage those. So make sure you've got this thing so that it won't flop around. You can put a roll of tape around the display if you want to. There are 2 screws that we need to remove here in order to disconnect the battery, and they are going to go through this little metal plate that's kind of a retaining bracket. So take these out, and as always, keep your screws well organized. Many of these are not interchangeable, so you want to make sure that you keep track of what goes where. This is the battery cable. That will be the first thing we want to disconnect. That way we don't have any power flowing through the phone, and we decrease any chances of causing problems to happen. Now there are 5 screws up here in this cover plate that we will have our display connectors underneath. So take those out, set them aside, and you should be able to lift that plate. Away from the phone, I like to use either some nylon or ESD safe tweezers. Now we're going to have several cables we need to disconnect. It might be a little bit hard to see these because they are obscured by the upper cables. So as you disconnect these and move them out of the way, you'll be able to reveal the cables that are underneath. Keep in mind that these connectors are very soft. They're easy to bend, so you have to be really careful. And when we go to plug these back in, you want to make sure that they aren't bent. Sometimes you'll get a partially connected cable that isn't fully making contact, and you'll have some functionality issues. This one's particularly wide, so I want to get the widest pry tool that I can and try to get as much of that surface area underneath that surface area as I pry it away from the logic board. So we're going to transfer quite a few parts. I like to start with the home button. There are screws that go around the perimeter of the screen where this metal frame is, and then of course the small pieces up at the top where the earpiece is. So this replacement part that I have doesn't come with much. You make it lucky. and have more parts on yours. What I like to do is plug in the new display at this point, connect the battery, and make sure that everything's working. If you do this, it will save you a lot of work if you happen to have a defective part, or maybe you have a phone that wouldn't turn on in the first place, you couldn't see a display, and this would confirm that there is a problem with the phone. So whenever possible, do test your replacement parts before you go through the entire repair, because it's really annoying when you have to go back and do this again because you have a problem. So I like to turn this on, let it light up, make sure there are no dead pixels, test the screen for touch sensitivity, make sure everything's working properly, and then we'll proceed with the repair. So we have all sorts of fun stuff that we're going to move across here, and you want to take a look at these cables and make note of the orientation as far as what is stacked on top of what, because you have to have all four of those cables layered in the correct order, otherwise you will not be able to connect them. It'll be very obvious when you get to that part, but you can make your life easier if you arrange them the same way they are that when they came out of the phone. I'm going to take these 3 screws out here at the bottom so that we can access the home button. And then what I really wanted to do in this video was give you some close-up shots of these very important areas where you want to be careful not to cause any damage. And this is where it's real sketchy, because this cable here has to kind of come, you have to come from this angle in order to unplug it, and then it flips over to the left-hand side. So you want to be real careful when you disconnect that. If you damage the home button, you'll never have a fingerprint scanner again. And it's virtually impossible to pry under any area here with a normal pry tool. So what I usually do is take a razor blade. After I've applied some heat, we want to warm up the adhesive. Yes, if you have a blow dryer, that'll work too. We just want to get this surface very warm to the touch, but not hot enough so that it burns you. I like to shoot for about 100 degrees Fahrenheit or so. And then we're going to very, very carefully go underneath this cable and slowly work our way across until we can pull it away from the glass or the plastic. If you cut through that cable, you're finished. You will not have a fingerprint scanner. Apply some heat to the back side of the home button while you're pushing with your smallest finger from the front of the phone, and you'll see it start to lift away very slowly. What we're shooting for here is to retain the adhesive ring that goes around that rubber gasket. If it comes off, it's not a done deal. You can replace this, but it's really annoying to have to put those on. So I like to reuse this whenever possible. If there's any glass debris, make sure that you check and remove it before you install it on the new display, because that will cause you some other problems. And this one, because it was shattered down at the bottom of the phone, we have to be really careful to make sure that there is no leftover glass or anything else stuck to that adhesive. From here, the nice thing is you don't have to worry too much. This will kind of fit right into place because they've got an area cut out there to accommodate the fingerprint scanner, and there is no square on the front of this button, so you don't have to worry about it being off by just a degree or two, because that can be annoying with the older iPhones when you notice that. Now we're going to have 6 screws that go along the side of this metal panel. We'll go ahead and take those out. Now stick with me here and don't get too far ahead, because there's something else important that you need to see. There are some screws up here at the top that we're going to remove, but I'm going to start with this one on the top right hand side and proceed across to the left and take out the ones that go into this little metal bracket. You can take that off at this point as well. And note that we've taken all of the screws out of the metal panel. You'll see the front-facing camera kind of flips across there, and it goes over the earpiece speaker, which has those 4 little gold coils that interface with the 4 little gold dots on the left-hand side. That's something that trips a lot of people up when they put this back together. So we're going to put it back in the same way, and you can see they didn't include the plastic parts, which is slightly annoying, but it'll slow you down by 5 or 10 minutes because we have to move this stuff across. Hopefully your part came with those installed, but if not, it's really not that big of a deal. I know a lot of people tend to be really upset when they get parts that don't have all of the small pieces, but I would almost rather have the OEM Apple pieces and transfer them across. And as you can see, if you apply some heat and pry them out, they move very easily most of the time. And if you break them, it's not even a big deal if they're cracked a little bit. Here's the important part. In order to get this thing off, down there at the bottom there's adhesive underneath where the fingerprint scanner plugged in. And again, it's a very awkward position as far as trying to pry underneath that cable. So I've tried every single method that I could come across and think of and ask other people about. And I came to the conclusion that this is the easiest way to remove this without causing damage. What we're going to do is lift the panel from the top first, and you may need to apply even more heat, but if you slowly just pull this panel away, if the adhesive is softened by the heat, and I'm going to hit it one more time with the heat gun here just to make sure, because we don't want to rip this cable. Now, if we do, it can be replaced, but that's just one more step that we want to avoid. So get this nice and warm, and you'll see that it just literally pops right off. So this is, whatever kind of adhesive this is, once you pull it off, it's not sticky anymore. It's not really a big deal. You don't have to worry about applying adhesive on there again. If you want to, you can. I don't usually really bother. It's not that big of a deal as long as everything's plugged in properly. Now up here at the top, we have a cable that needs to pull away from the frame. You can see I'm kind of getting underneath it here for the proximity sensor. And then underneath that, we're going to have another one of these little plastic pieces that we'll need to move across because my replacement part did not come with it. And then you can see where the microphone also goes into a small rubber boot, which we'll have to move in addition to the frame for the proximity sensor. I want to call it a proximity sensor guide. Now, if you heat it up and push with a pry tool from the front, a lot of times you can get this thing to go straight through. This is one of the easiest ways I've found to at least get it started. And once you push it through a little bit, you should be able to get underneath it from the backside and just kind of pull this out completely. All right, so you can take that off and set it aside. And then we've got our plastic piece and then the mesh that goes behind the, or in front of the earpiece rather, that still need to be transferred. This one was a little more stubborn than usual, so the nice thing is you don't have to worry too much. It's flexible, so you can't really break it. If it gets bent, you can straighten it out later, but we just want to make sure we get underneath this as we're peeling it away from the glass. And then, of course, make sure you don't have any residual shards of glass left over if your frame's damaged, or excuse me, if your screen or glass is damaged in that area. All right, so this one you can just kind of go in, and I try to pry from each corner after I apply some heat, and usually this one will pop right out. And you see there are two tabs on the left hand, or two pegs rather, on the left hand side, so they act as a guide for when you move it into the new display. And then we want to get this last little piece off. That thing was really sticky for some reason. So I'm just going to try to straighten this out as much as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we do want to make sure that it lines up correctly. This adhesive, the trickiest thing probably is finding a starting point for it. Although peeling the plastic off can be tricky as well. But we're just going to need a very, very small piece. This is the red tape adhesive. I have the links on my website, so if you check the video description, you'll find most of the tools and parts that I use if you follow those links to gocellphonerepair.com. And I'm just going to set enough to hold the front-facing camera and proximity sensor guides in position, so it doesn't need to be a complete adhesive installation. And I don't like to use glue in these areas. Some people do, but it can get really messy if you're not careful. So you can either apply your adhesive to the part itself or to the guide before you install it, whichever works for you or whichever you find easiest is probably the best option. Again, peeling this plastic off can just be time consuming sometimes. So on the inside, remember, you never want to press down on the inside here with anything sharp. You will scrape the paint off, and then you'll have a big spot on the other side that will not go away. On the black screens, you can Sharpie it a little bit, but on the white screens, you're going to have an empty spot that's going to be very noticeable. So I try not to touch the inside of these with anything like a pair of tweezers. You see, I was just kind of grabbing it there. And there's only one correct position that this will sit in, and it's just like that. And looks like I'm going to have to add some adhesive for the mesh also. And here's one small piece of adhesive for the proximity sensor guide. Right, so go ahead and set that into place. And then we'll kind of push this down and straighten it out. And then the fun part, we need to put this back inside, and it can be a little tricky to line this up. But make sure that it goes in to the same position it was when it came out. This will fold over from the top. And you have to be really careful of that little flap that I'm going to point out here. You see how I tuck that in? So that little piece has to be bent over towards the inside. If it sticks out, you're going to have trouble. So make sure that goes in, and then we need to now open it up while that first half is on the inside so that we can put the speaker on top of it. And this thing has a tendency to shift it around, but once you get it in there, it will hopefully stick in place. If not, you can always use a little bit of adhesive or something to make it stay. But what we need to do is set the speaker down, and again, take note of where the screws go because that will help you to get this lined up. Fold the front-facing camera over the back side of the earpiece speaker. Make sure that the camera goes into the correct position, and we'll come back to this here in just a second. Now at the top, you'll notice that that cable has to line up with the two pegs that are sticking out from the new display. So make sure that that lines up also. If you end up with no earpiece sound, this will be the reason why. Those have to be in exactly the right position. And as soon as you're confident that you have everything lined up properly, I would get at least one screw in here to hold things in place. One of those two top screws, of course, because we want to wait on that last one on the right-hand side because it is shared with the metal back plate. And no, it's not. Right, so what we're going to do is take this small piece of adhesive off of the old display that covers the connectors for the backlight. Because if you don't, they can short out and then you'll have more repairs to do. So I'm not sure how this came in this way, but you've got to make sure that these contacts are covered up. And I said 3, there's actually like 5. Make sure that's covered up. If not, you will definitely have problems later on. And at this point, I'm kind of putting these cables into the correct position. It's a little bit easier to do it now. And there's some adhesive on this one that you have to peel off, usually. And now we can go ahead and take the film off of the back side of the LCD. Make sure that you remove this. And also note that there is another small piece up here at the top on this particular display that needs to come off. And that cable goes underneath this plate. The one that has the metal piece running across the top there, make sure that that goes under the back plate and not on top of it. And untangling these cables again. And we'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see that this can be tricky sometimes. You might have to push that bottom flex cable, the one that's on the back plate, you might have to push it up towards the middle or towards the top end of the phone because it doesn't always line up perfectly, especially since we don't have any adhesive under it at this point. So you might have to adjust this a little bit. Whatever you do, be patient and be very careful. You do not want to damage that fingerprint scanner. From here, it's pretty much downhill. We'll go ahead and put the screws in. Make sure you get these 6 that go along the side. And if you're missing the foam padding that goes on the back side of the display connectors, you can try to heat off the old ones. And I usually take a razor blade and sort of a sawing motion to get underneath them. If you're not able to salvage these, that's okay. You can take some electrician's tape and cut it to size. Just make sure that any of the cables that had this foam padding, you do go back and put something on top of them so that they are not just bare metal. And you can see that one's pretty well destroyed. So if they're too thin, you really can't get them off in one piece. You'll just have to substitute something else. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to make sure you don't have a big bare piece of metal going against that plate that holds these into position. And do take your time here. These can be tricky to line up, especially the last one. So if you feel any resistance, you're probably not lined up straight. You kind of have to back up and just take your time, try over and over until it snaps into place without much effort. You shouldn't have to push very hard on those cables. They are very easy to damage. So we'll get our 5 screws back in. Connect the battery. And remember to put the cover plate back on over the battery terminal. And one last thing you want to be absolutely certain of, and that is that you tuck these tabs at the top end of the display underneath the edge of the rear housing. So those have to go inside, if not your screen's going to be popping up. So I try to get a really good close-up here so you can see exactly how that fits. And I usually just kind of work around the edges. Don't push on the center of the screen very hard, but this should all go in, again, without very much effort. If you're having trouble getting it to go into place, then there's probably something out of position or something causing a problem. You want to go back and check and make sure that you didn't forget anything. And of course, we have our two last screws that go in on the bottom. And we are good to go. If you found the video helpful, like it, share it, check out my channel for more tutorials and product reviews, and most of all, remember to hit the subscribe button. Feel free to leave your feedback in the comments section, and thanks for watching.